Okay, so here we are in part 2 of our lecture video. So let's talk a little bit more about the growth of Islam and the creation of an Islamic empire. Cool? Cool. So creating an empire and stabilizing it were two different things. We've seen this in other places before, right? So Alexander's, for example, has come and go. Others have had more stamina. So how would Islam fare? The final rightful caliph, or successor, you remember, Ali, was assassinated, leading to the Umayyads, a branch of the Qaryash clan, to lay claim to Ali's legacy. This first dynasty relocated to the city of Damascus, introduced hereditary monarchy to resolve leadership disputes, and ruled from Damascus until the Abbasids overthrew them in 750. As the Umayyad dynasty spread Islam around or beyond Arabia, some peoples resented the rulers' high-handed ways. The Arab conquerors enslaved large numbers of non-Arabs in the course of their conquests. The non-Arab freed people found that they, too, were still regarded as lesser persons in spite of living in Arab households and becoming Muslims. The area where protests against Arab domination reached a crescendo was in the east, where most of the Arab conquerors did not live separate from local populations. One of the early leaders of Iranian protest movements in this region was Abu Muslim, whose message about Islam was that it was a universal religion, open equally to all groups. He stated, quote, "I am a man from among the Muslims, and I do not trace my descent to any group to the exclusion of the other. My only ancestry is Islam." Even though opponents assassinated Abu Muslim, they did not silence his message. A coalition of dissidents emerged. Soon, disgruntled provincial authorities and their military allies, as well as non-Arab converts, joined the movement. After amassing a sizable military force, the Abbasid coalition trounced the Umayyad ruler in 750 CE. Thereafter, the center of the caliphate shifted to Iraq, signifying the eastward sprawl of the faith and its empire. It also represented a success for non-Arab groups within Islam without eliminating Arab influence at the dynasty's center, the capital, Baghdad, in Arabic-speaking Iraq. This process changed the nature of the emerging empire, for as the political center of Islam moved out of Arabia to Syria at Damascus, and then with the Abbasids to Baghdad, ethnic and geographical diversity replaced what had been ethnic purity. Thus, even as the universalizing religion strove to create a common spiritual world, it became more diverse within its political dimensions. Not only did the Abbasids open Islam to Persian peoples, but they also embraced Greek and Hellenistic learning, Indian science, and Chinese innovations. In this fashion, Islam, drawing its original impetus from the teachings and actions of a prophetic figure, followed the trajectory of Christianity and Buddhism and became a faith with a universalist message and appeal. An early challenge for the Abbasid rulers was to determine how traditional or Arab they could be and still rule so vast an empire. They chose to keep the bedrock political institution of the early Islamic state, that is, the caliphate, the line of political leaders reaching back to Muhammad, so they kept that intact. Signifying both the political and spiritual head of the Islamic community, this institution had arisen as the successor to Muhammad's shining leadership. As the empire expanded, it became increasingly decentralized politically, enabling wily regional governors and competing caliphates in Spain and Egypt to grab power. The political result was an Islamic world shot through with multiple centers of power, nominally led by a weakened Abbasid caliphate. Even as Islam's political center diffused, though, its spiritual center remained fixed in Mecca, where many of the faithful gathered to circle the Kaaba and to reaffirm their devotion to Islam as part of their pilgrimage obligation. Remember, that's one of those 5 pillars. The Abbasids, like all rulers, relied on force to integrate their empire. For imperial Islam, as for the Romans, exercising military power required marshaling warriors and soldiers from across Afroeurasia. In the early stages of the military, leaders had conscripted military forces from local Arab populations, creating citizen armies. But as Arab populations settled down in garrison cities, the Abbasid rulers turned to professional soldiers from the empire's peripheries. Now they recruited from Turkish speaking communities in Central Asia and from the non Arab Berber speaking peoples of North and West Africa. Their reliance on foreign, that is, non Arab military personnel represented a major shift in the Islamic world. Not only did the change infuse the empire with dynamic new populations, but soon these groups gained political authority, just as the quote barbarians had done in the last centuries of the Roman Empire, as you'll recall. Having begun as an Arab state and then incorporating strong Persian influence, the Islamic Empire now embraced Turkish elements from the pastoral belt of Central Asia. Pre-Islamic Arabia was one of the last regions in the southwest of Asia where patriarchy had not triumphed. Instead, these people were matrilocal. Men married into women's families and moved to those families' locations, as was common in tribal communities. Some women engaged in a variety of occupations and even, if they became wealthy, married more than one husband. But contact with the rest of Southwest Asia, where men's power over women prevailed, was already altering women's status in the Arabian Peninsula before the birth of Muhammad. Muhammad's relations with women reflected these changes. As a young man, he married a woman 15 years his senior, so she was 15 years older than him. Her name was Khadijah, an independent trader who took no other wives, and he took no other wives before she died, so she was his only wife until she died. It was Khadijah to whom he went in fear following his first revelations. She wrapped him in a blanket and assured him of his sanity. She was also his first convert. Later in life, however, he took younger wives, some of whom were widows of his companions, and insisted on their veiling, partly as a sign of modesty and privacy. He married his favorite wife, Aisha, when she was only 9 or 10 years old. An important figure in early Islam, she was the daughter of Abu Bakr, who became the first caliph after Muhammad's death. She became a major source for collecting Muhammad's sayings. By the time Islam reached Southwest Asia and North Africa, where strict gender rules and women's subordinate status were entrenched, the new faith was adopting a patriarchal outlook. Muslim men could divorce freely, women could not. A man could take 4 wives and numerous concubines. A woman could only have one husband. Well-to-do women, always veiled, lived secluded from male society. Still, the Quran did offer women some protections. Men had to treat each wife with respect if they took more than one. Women could inherit property, although only half of what a man inherited. Infanticide was taboo. Marriage dowries went directly to the bride rather than to her guardian, indicating women's independent legal standing. And while a woman's adultery drew harsh punishment, its proof required eyewitness testimony. The result was a legal system that reinforced men's dominance over women, but empowered magistrates to oversee the definition of male honor and proper behavior. Islam's whirlwind rise generated internal tensions from the start. Muslims shared a reverence for a basic text and a single God, but often they had little else in common. Religious and political divisions only grew deeper as Islam spread into new corners of Afroeurasia. Once the Prophet Muhammad died, believers disagreed over who should take his place and how to preserve authority. Strains associated with selecting the first 4 caliphs after Muhammad's death left a legacy of protest. To this day, they represent the greatest challenge facing Islam's efforts to create a unified culture. The most powerful opposition movement arose in North Africa, Lower Iraq, and the Iranian Plateau. The question that fueled disagreements were who should succeed the Prophet, how the succession would take place, and who should lead Islam's expansion into the larger world. The vast majority of Muslims today are Sunnis, from the Arabic word meaning tradition. They accept the political succession of to the Prophet through the 4 rightly guided caliphs, and then to the Umayyad and Abbasid dynasties as the correct one. That's the correct line of succession to them. Dissidents, such as the Shiites, contest this version. Shiites, members of the party of Ali, among the earliest dissidents, felt that the proper successors should have been Ali, who had married the Prophet's daughter Fatima, and his descendants. Ali was one of the early converts to Islam and one of the band of Meccans who migrated with the Prophet to Medina. The fourth of the rightly guided caliphs, he ruled over the Muslim community from 656 to 661 CE, dying at the hands of an assassin who struck him down as he was praying in a mosque in Kufa, Iraq. Shiites believe that Ali's descendants, whom they call imams, have religious and prophetic power as well as political authority, and thus should enjoy spiritual primacy. Shi'ism appealed to groups who the Umayyads and Abbasids had excluded from power. It became Islam's most potent dissident force and created a permanent divide within Islam. Shi'ism was well established in the first century of Islam's existence. Over time, the Sunnis and Shiites diverged even more than the early political disputes would have indicated. Both groups had their own versions of the Sharia and their own theological tenets. By 1000 CE, Islam, which had originated as a radical religious revolt in a small corner of the Arabian Peninsula, had grown into a vast political and religious empire. It had become the dominant political and cultural force in the middle regions of Afroeurasia. Like its rival in this part of the world, Christianity, it aspired to universality. But unlike Christianity, it was linked from its outset to political power. Muhammad and his early followers created an empire to facilitate the expansion of their faith, while their Christian counterparts inherited an empire where Constantine embraced their faith. A vision of a world under the jurisdiction of Muslim caliphs, adhering to the dictates of the Sharia, drove Muslim armies, merchants, and scholars to territories thousands of miles away from Mecca and Medina. Yet the impulse to expand ran out of energy at the fringes of Islam's reach, creating political fragmentation within the Muslim world and leaving much of Western Europe and China untouched. But it also had important internal consequences. Muslims were no longer the minority within their own lands, owing to the conversion of Christians, Jews, and other populations under Muslim empires. So, very different from how Christianity expanded, yes? This is the end of part 2. In part 3, we will talk about the emergence of European Christendom.